there's genetically modified organisms in this food.
As far as I know, most corn out there nowadays is all GMO.
When you are messing around with genes, there's something called a pleiotropic effect, where one gene does more than one thing.
Yeah, you didn't follow the directions.
Yeah. Infanticides and genocides and all the other sides that they spray on these things.
Totally different episode.
Welcome to another Kitchen Sink Microscopy. I'm Casey Rochford.
I'm Eric Rosenblatt.
All right. Well, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I was in the store the other day, just getting some groceries, and I noticed I've been noticing this for a while, that food packages have a little kind of logo on it that says non-GMO. And it got me to thinking, what's that all about? Why is that such a big deal to people?
2 words: scare tactics.
Well, that does make sense.
Not so much with the non-GMO labels. I don't really see a huge problem with that. It's just here in Washington a few years back, maybe 5 years now, Initiative 522, I think it was, there was this movement to require labels on food that said, like, this contains genetically modified content.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah, and
wasn't that struck down or something like that?
Luckily, yeah. Like, disregarding all of the added cost and rigmarole that nationwide companies would have to go through just to get food into this state, like the whole thing behind it is, like, there's really nothing to worry about. And typically when you see a label outlining contents, usually it's because of an allergen, or like, if it's with cigarettes, it's like, hey, this will cause cancer, that sort of thing. That's usually when you see a label.
Well, that makes sense.
And so if you have a label saying there's genetically modified organisms in this food, your first instinct as a layperson will probably be fear.
Sure. Well, because people don't know what that really means, so they automatically start getting a little concerned about it. Genetically modified organism. I mean, it just sounds.
Yeah. Well, there's a connotation that comes with that very descriptive term for food, like modified food, like that doesn't sound good. But really, like, if you look into it, it's very good. It's been very good. And we've been doing it a lot longer than we think we have.
Well, I mean, really, depending on your definition of genetically modified, we've been doing it for millennia.
Exactly. And according to the World Health Organization, their definition of genetically modified absolutely fits what farmers have been doing for centuries and centuries. Basically mixing plants, selecting for particular traits. These are all fundamentally changes in DNA that wasn't there in a previous generation.
Sure. And now we're just doing it in a lab, I guess, sometimes, or often.
Yeah. So basically you have the same result with a different tool, a more precise tool, one where you actually, like, know what you're putting in. Like a lot of times the scare tactic goes that we don't know what we're putting in our food, but it's actually quite the opposite. We are deliberately putting something in, and it's been tested and it's safe, you know. And when you're mixing things around, you don't really know what you're gonna get, and it takes a long time and a whole lot of trial and error to get to the end result. I mean, corn didn't come around overnight,
Well,
as we know it.
as far as I know, most corn out there nowadays is all GMO. There's no like
There's no
original
such
corn.
yeah, there's no such thing as organic corn that you see at a store, for instance.
Yeah, well, I think people get really concerned when they hear that, because they think of like something from a comic book or something. You're hitting it with radiation and it's mutating and it's going to affect you in some kind of crazy way.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really like that, but I think there's legitimate concerns about that, especially with the type of technology that we have now and the way that we're doing things. It's not like we're just taking a couple of slight variations of different plants and breeding them together and trying to pull out the traits that we want. I mean, there's certainly a lot more power now that we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
that's what people are concerned about. I think that maybe there could be some underlying harm that no one knows about.
that's not an unreasonable thing to be worried about. I'll grant that. Because when you are messing around with genes, there's something called a pleiotropic effect, where one gene does more than one thing. It might have like a primary goal or task or whatever. There was a study where this was discovered, actually, I think, was in some domesticated wolves or something. They kind of linked, I forget what it was, fur color or something like that, to aggression, and determined that, like, by selecting for this certain fur color, you ended up with more or less aggressive wolves. And then they were like, wow, I guess genes do more than one thing, you know. And so, like, I'd like to do another show about this digression, but that's absolutely a concern to think about when you're talking about genetically modifying humans or other, like, animal life.
Sure,
Because
more complex life forms. Basically.
exactly, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. When you're talking about plants and stuff, there's a lot less to worry about in that regard, because there's so much less going on in their physiology.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there are some GM foods. There's a genetically modified salmon that I don't know if it's hit the market yet or not, but I think it was approved last I heard. And basically what they're doing is making this salmon like more healthy. They're making it, like, I believe they made it sterile so that it can't, go out into the wild and start messing up the genome of the wild population. And like, they've really thought this through, and there was a whole lot of pushback on it, but I think it ultimately got approval.
I'd be curious to see the results of that.
Yeah.
If it's a good tasting salmon, that would be great, because salmon, oh man, I really love salmon. It's right up there with crab in my view.
Never had crab.
Oh, well, we'll do an episode. Casey's never had crab before episode. Coming right up.
I think we can skip that.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of public angst towards Monsanto.
Yeah.
It's kind of like at the core of this, the GMO food modification sort of thing. Everybody kind of goes to Monsanto, like, oh, they're so evil, they've done so much harm. But when I looked into them, yeah, not everything they did was stellar. There are some things have not necessarily been that great, but they've been behind a lot of major innovations in science and technology and medicine and biology. And yeah,
Well, they're kind of vilified by the opposition to GMOs. Um, they're made out to be like the industry leader, the corporate giant, you know. And I mean, the fact is, they're not alone. It's not like they're a monopoly.
no, they're definitely not. But they're the big one that everybody points to. I kind of feel
Yeah.
like it's almost like a straw man.
It is absolutely. And I mean, they've been bought out by Bayer, and I believe before that they weren't even like the top competitor in that field. But like for whatever reason, I think a lot of this ends up pointing to glyphosate in Roundup.
Well,
I
yeah,
think
the
that's where
whole
this all
Roundup
started.
thing, the Roundup situation is certainly that almost might be its own discussion in and of itself.
Yeah, there's a lot to that. I mean, there's definitely some health studies coming out linking it to like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's from like direct contact, not like, oh, there's a little residue on my carrot, I'm gonna get cancer now. No, that's not gonna happen. It's got a very short half-life. It's water soluble. By the time it gets in your mouth, it's gone.
Yeah, exactly. It's not to say that concern wouldn't be warranted in those kinds of situations, but yeah, I think you're right. They've been vilified unnecessarily.
One other thing that they get picked on for, and this is another debate I'm sure we could spin off on. It's the whole idea of patenting the genetic structure of their product, basically.
I've thought about. I've actually, that's been something I was actually going to bring up. The idea that if you modify something genetically, that you can then patent it and then own it, which goes that's a super deep topic, because what if that happens with people? Do you own a person's DNA if you modify it? But well, let's just leave that one. That's
no, actually, no. I'll tell you what the difference is. Just real quick, the whole thing about patenting, the seed basically is what they're patenting in this particular case.
Yep.
The thing about patenting a seed is that it basically is like taking your copy of Microsoft Office and making a copy for your buddy. Like it's like an exact replica, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you start playing around with genes and in humans, that the way that DNA splits and all that stuff and gets shared with another parent and all that, you basically have like a new entity. I don't think copyright would be able to skip generations with humans, but that's like an aside. Anyway, basically some people got in trouble with Monsanto about like taking their neighbors' seeds and planting them for themselves, and that's a little shady,
Well, and I did look into that, because I know that there was a lot of talk about there were people saying, oh, well, there were farmers who were innocent. They just had their farm and a bunch of seeds blew into their land and started sprouting up, and Monsanto sued them because they had patented plants, their patented genetic strain growing on their land. And the more I dug into that, the more that kind of dissolved. I don't think that's actually correct. They have sued people, but very, very few. And it's typically, from what I could uncover, looks more like legitimate cases of people abusing the contract between Monsanto and the customer.
Yeah.
It's not just an innocent thing where I just happen to have like 5 Monsanto plants growing in my field, and now I'm getting sued. Oh, hi, Floyd.
Floyd the mascot.
yeah, he will be by force probably. I kind of pushes himself in there.
Yeah, Monsanto definitely gets a little bit of a bad rap. They certainly are your typical big company that does a lot of big company things.
Well, they're a convenient boogeyman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that I think you're right in that.
And a lot of problems that people bring up about using GM crops is a loss of genetic diversity, and really that they're not wrong, but what that boils down to is user error, because you are supposed to keep what they call a safe haven of naturally occurring crops in the area for weeds and insects to basically have that.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And the people who are like, well, genetically modified stuff has better yields and it's cheaper, I'm just going to do it everywhere. And then they end up with these insecticide resistant bugs, and then everyone starts blaming the GMOs. And it's just user error.
Yeah, you didn't follow the directions.
Yeah. I mean, you don't follow the directions, there are repercussions. And
well, I wanted to kind of talk to that whole higher yields thing, which I think that is a huge benefit. GMOs can certainly create higher yields. You can create crops that can grow in really adverse conditions. They're resistant to certain things that would attack them, but also there's another negative in that regard, that maybe there's an incentive to create larger crops, whatever it might be, fruit or vegetables or things, and as a result maybe they're making them so large that they don't have, or they have reduced nutritional value. That's a thing that I've read about. I haven't really dug into that, but it's a concern that people have, that you have these giant fruits or something, but they're mostly water and they have very little nutritional value.
I don't know that they're making fruits like any bigger. That, like, I've seen some pretty monstrous organic fruits, and I'm
that's true.
Like, holy crap, how'd they get it that big? But
I've seen that with pumpkins.
Cases, in many cases, the nutritional value is actually increased. Like one life-saving example is golden rice. In Asian countries where basically the rice is like the main staple, there's not a whole lot of nutrients in that, and there was some blindness or rickets or something going on there, lack of vitamin A effectively. And they basically engineered this rice to have vitamin A, carotene, and so it takes on a carrot-like color. But that saved lives, and that's a GMO.
It's a good point. It's hard to argue with that. I do kind of think it is a revolutionary development. The more we go into this, I see there's a lot more positives than negatives. The negatives can be mitigated, but the positives far outweigh the negatives. And I think there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction to the fact that something is genetically modified. Like, there's some sort of weird Spider-Man science going on behind the scenes, and they're making things into radioactive foods that are going to mutate you or something. I think people like the resistance to GMOs comes from people's lack of understanding of what that actually means. Probably.
Yeah.
It's just a thought. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's pretty common. Like things that we don't understand, we tend to shy away from.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for some people, that's their reaction. For others, like probably you and I, our instinct is to dig into it and learn more about it.
Yeah,
But,
exactly. And you know, you can be skeptical of something, but you should be open-minded at the same time. Like,
yeah, and probably the other thing worth mentioning is by digging in and learning about something, uh, I should probably mention that there is a proper way to learn and a wrong way to learn.
well, that's totally true. Yeah. Why don't you explain that a little bit to those that don't know?
Well, there's this saying that, you know, people have gotten their research degrees from Google University. And basically people say, the people who are saying, just do your own research, typically have done their research on the front page of Google, which is fed by algorithms, which, you know, like the more people you get digging around with questions like, is the earth really flat? You know, is climate change bogus? You know, when they use those keywords in their searches, Google, not being a human, not knowing how to interpret that correctly, thinks that, oh, these keywords are what everyone is looking for. This must be like the most relevant. These things get moved to the top. All these conspiracy theories get moved to the top, and all the scholarly journals and stuff that nobody really wants to read anyway get pushed to the bottom. And, you know, a lot of them are behind a paywall, and you know, like access to like really good data is hard to come by.
It is.
But,
and
you know, like you should be skeptical of the sources that you're looking at more than the concept that a lot of scientists are putting their faith in, you know?
Well, no, that's definitely true. And there's probably, as far as algorithms go, there's, you know, it's going to follow whatever bias the language of the question poses.
Right. Yeah.
So if you, depending on how you phrase it, you're going to get results completely differently than somebody else.
Yep.
And yeah, that.
You know, long ago in the early days of the internet, when I was in a college class on logic or something of that nature, we were being taught how to look for sources on the internet and things like that.
You mean when Lycos was a browser?
Prodigy and American Online.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
But you know, like I had it instilled in me at a young age to take with a grain of salt something that comes from like a .org site versus something from a .edu site when I'm looking for data. You know, and that's certainly not always the case. There's obviously, like, anyone can get a .org, including like a PhD from Harvard. That's and anyone at Harvard can have a blog and say whatever the hell they want. Well, so it can go both ways, but you really basically just have to take the data and really put it to the test in your own mind.
Well, and that comes down to having an understanding of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Which I think is a dying art, sadly.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So you know, we've kind of gone down a few different roads, but I do want to touch on something that kind of is has acted as sort of a counter to the GMO, or I guess has paralleled the anti-GMO movement, and that is the movement towards organic food.
Ah, yes, big farm.
Yeah. Ooh, very punny.
That's me. Yeah, like the I say that slightly in jest, but there really is, a corporate movement behind that as well. It's not little guys in their farms trying to get you to buy their products. There's companies that want to tout this stuff. So you get propaganda from both sides.
Well, you do, but couldn't there possibly be some positive benefits from, at least as far as like certified organic? Even though, well, I'll just preface this with my thought that I think that the term organic is completely ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
because all food is organic. It has carbon in it.
Carbon, hydrogen, and
Organic, like
oxygen.
what? Why are we using that term? We should have something different.
Yeah.
But whatever, we settled on it. That's what it's called. You know, there's less pesticides, hormones, and antibiotics, and all that stuff. That, I mean, isn't that a good thing?
There's not really less pesticides, actually.
Isn't that part of being certified organic, though, that you use no artificial pesticides or any kind of like additives?
No artificial pesticides, yes, but there are definitely pesticides being used, and the problem with using these certified organic pesticides is they don't go through the same safety standards. There's been a lot of food illness related to, like, directly related to organic foods, and a lot of that just comes from people having this being lulled into this false sense of security. I think they're maybe not washing their fruit as much as they should. They
That's
think it's
certainly,
organic and it's just safe. There's
that's
kind of a built-in assumption.
yeah, that's a legitimate concern. Yeah, what about the fact that, or I guess the idea that an organic product is coming from a smaller farm, and you're helping out the little guy?
Well, here's the thing: to become certified organic, the little guy has to pay out a lot of money.
Oh, yeah,
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 and
a lot, yeah.
a lot of money, and it's such a regulated field that they have to prove all these things, that there's like a certain percentage of, like, non-GMO or non-synthetic, let's say, but that's another word that I take exception to.
Yeah, that has a lot of interpretations.
Yeah,
I'll agree with that. Yeah.
there's all this crap they have to go through. That cost gets passed on to you. There's been all these studies that look into the nutritional value. Most of the time, it's a wash. In fact, organic food typically has higher trans fats, but marginally so. So it's not really like a thing to worry about, but that is one of the things you don't want to have too much of.
Mm-hmm.
And so if anything, it's like ever so slightly less healthy, really.
Huh. Yeah, 'cause I did actually look into some of those studies, and there were a few that found that maybe there were higher levels of antioxidants or nutrients or vitamins or something like that, lower levels of nitrates, dairy products that have more omega-3 fatty acids or something like that. But then there were other studies that completely countered that and said, well, it's basically the same. So I don't know what to think about that, honestly. And maybe the whole organic movement is kind of just a buzzword and doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah. And
But that's kind of sad, actually.
yeah. And, like, I don't want to make it sound like organic's a bad thing necessarily. Like, you want to go to the farmer's market and buy something from your local farmer, by all means do so. Like, it's
Oh,
great
sure. Well,
to support the local guys, and that's probably a better way of doing it than going to the organic aisle at your store, to be quite honest.
I totally agree, especially if you're concerned about the environment, because buying local, there's a lot of benefits in that regard from the standpoint of shipping and handling and all
Oh
that,
yeah, yeah, that's
distribution.
That's another point that I wanted to get onto is the environmental question. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on which one is maybe better for the environment, organic or GM?
Well, GMO, obviously, uh, because of the scale of production.
Mm-hmm.
There's an economy of scale going on there that can't be matched by small operations. That's not to say that small operations aren't valuable, because they are. Um, but I think people look at those and think automatically that there's some kind of harm being done, and I don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would probably agree with that because you get these easier to grow crops. There's less need for insecticides and or pesticides or whatever they spray on there.
Yeah, incesticide
Herbicides.
is a completely different thing.
Yeah,
That's
I've gotten through this, so
yeah, I know. Same here. So. Mhm.
infanticides
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
genocides and all the other sides that they
Yes.
spray on these things.
Totally different episode.
um, where was I going with that? Uh,
We were talking about economies of scale and the large
yeah,
scale productions and GMOs.
yeah. Like there is maybe like using up more footprint or whatever, and more water and more soil nutrient. There might be like a minor impact to like a local environment, but as far as like the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide go,
Don't
there's
forget
really
the
not,
nitrogen.
and yeah, like there's
Really
not much.
important with plants.
Yeah, but that's mostly from the ground.
Mhm.
Yeah, like there's really not too much to worry about from that aspect, and like leaching stuff from the various sides that they do spray on these things. That's happening on both ends, and so ultimately you have to really kind of stack this against uh, the demand. The
Yeah.
demand is huge, and simply put, organic farming or small farming or both combined, like turning into Captain Planet, still wouldn't be enough to eat everybody.
Well, no, that's absolutely true. And the things that the plants that we have as they are can't withstand certain environments, and you can genetically modify something to be able to withstand that. And that's a very valuable thing. But at the same time, I like the idea of small farmers and small operations. I think that's kind of important to support that. Um, so I guess the takeaway is I kind of have mixed feelings about it, and my feelings have changed. I was an anti-GMO, organic only person, and over the years I've kind of changed to something different.
Yeah, I don't want to say I was like anti-GMO. I've always been kind of fascinated by that, but
Nope,
long,
me too.
yeah, like long before I was even a scientist, the first time I had cancer, I tried eating all organic, and whether or not it was placebo effect, I actually felt better, but I couldn't afford to keep up with it.
Well, it's
Uh,
very expensive. Yeah, I totally understand that. And there are studies, a few studies that may have been countered by other studies that have shown nothing, but some that show that maybe the organic foods might be a little more nutritionally valuable, I guess.
there, so that's like it's not black and white. There
Right.
are somewhere a long time ago I saw a list of there was a study done on all kinds of these fruits and vegetables and stuff, and there was a list that they made where there was uh, like which one has more nutrients, which ones are washes, like right down the middle. And I think the only one I can really remember is that like bananas, you might as well save a few cents and just not buy organic because you're not really getting any benefit from
Don't
bananas.
get me started on bananas. The Gros Michel. No, it's gone. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. We got off on a tangent. So.
Yeah. So basically, like, nutritional value is kind of like, it goes both ways. Like, some organic stuff, yeah, it's a little more nutrient rich. Others aren't. Especially the stuff that's been engineered to have nutrients that you need, like the gold rice.
Sure. And I think that's maybe where people need to use their own judgment, and not jump to conclusions based on a misunderstanding of the circumstances. We, the name genetically modified organism really gets people going, and I think it's unwarranted.
Absolutely.
And it does us all harm, because it's kind of a spectrum, and there's a lot more to it. Like you said, it's not just black and white, and I completely agree with that. That it's very nuanced. It's something people should look into for themselves and understand that just because we change the DNA of something doesn't necessarily make it like Spider-Man or the Hulk or something.
Right. Yeah. And on that note, there's a lot of people that are concerned, and they point to things like, well, this little bit of genetic material is coming from a venom, so it must be dangerous. You see a lot of this with the anti-vax movement too. Basically, it's an ingredient of something dangerous. It's not the dangerous thing.
Yeah, and just because it possesses that particular set of portion of the DNA doesn't necessarily make it exhibit those same patterns.
Right. It's like, a good analogy would be like, if I handed you a trigger, no other part of the gun, are you going to be worried about getting shot by it?
No.
So why are we worried about a little piece of DNA that came from some spider's venom?
And I'm honestly, like, while I'm a little bit cautious about some of those things, like, I think I've seen enough movies as a kid that kind of like make me concerned. Like, okay, well, we should be careful. We don't want to, go too far. But at the same time, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
That we can do this, and there's so many opportunities to do something amazing.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people worry about like allergic reactions to GM foods, but they're actually working on a non-allergenic peanut. That's going to save lives.
That would be awesome. Or how about wheat that what people with celiac disease could eat? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, the 95% of the world that's gluten sensitive.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that.
That's another episode right there.
No, we're going to get into that later.
As I drink a gluten-free beer.
Mine is definitely not.
I'm over here talking smack and drinking the I'm actually allergic to the things that don't have gluten in them, so I'm just gonna break out later.
That's okay. That's all right. This has been like a really awesome conversation. And as usual, we sort of just kind of just scratch the surface. There's so much more going on here. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that have a lot of things to say. And as usual, I would welcome anybody that has any ideas, thoughts, different views to comment, involve themselves in the conversation, because that, well, as is evident, we love conversation.
Yep. Yeah, and that's probably about all the time we've got on this particular topic for today. But like and subscribe, share with your buddies, and let's get the thought processes going. And questions and comments are always encouraged.
Always.
And thanks for deep sink diving with us, and we'll catch you next time.
And have a great day.